In 1917, a secret message arrived. If it had never been intercepted, America might never have entered World War I. The world, in 1914, had already plunged into a chaos of unprecedented scale. Europe was a continent in flames, torn apart by the complex web of alliances, rivalries, and political ambitions that had been simmering for decades. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary had triggered a chain reaction that none could have foreseen. The Great War, later known as World War I, had begun. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire quickly aligned themselves as the Central Powers, while France, Britain, and Russia formed the Allied Powers. Within a matter of months, armies mobilized, borders became battlefields, and cities transformed into strategic targets. For America, however, the war was a distant event. President Woodrow Wilson had adopted a stance of strict neutrality, emphasizing that the United States would not be drawn into the conflict. "This is not our war," he would repeatedly declare. The American public, though sympathetic to the Allied cause in some regions, largely agreed. Families, communities, and newspapers debated the pros and cons of involvement, but a desire to remain untouched by the horrors overseas prevailed. Despite this official neutrality, America was not entirely detached. Its economy was thriving on the European conflict. Factories from New York to Chicago were busily producing weapons, munitions, and supplies, which were then exported primarily to the Allied powers. Merchant ships traversed the Atlantic, carrying cargo that would indirectly support the war effort. In this way, America managed to stay out of combat while still exercising significant influence over the resources that flowed into Europe. Germany, meanwhile, faced mounting pressure. The Allied naval blockade, orchestrated by Britain, was cutting off vital supplies, including food and raw materials, to the Central Powers. The German population was feeling the strain. Shortages of basic necessities led to unrest and a growing sense of desperation. The military high command understood that without decisive action, the tide of the war would turn irrevocably against them. It was in this climate of urgency that Arthur Zimmermann, Germany's foreign secretary, conceived a bold and risky plan. Germany needed a way to neutralize the potential threat of the United States should it abandon neutrality. Zimmermann proposed an audacious strategy: send a secret message to Germany's ambassador in Mexico, instructing Mexico to join the war against the United States if America declared war on Germany. The incentive offered was tantalizing. In the event of a successful campaign, Mexico would regain the territories of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, lands it had lost decades earlier. This plan was dangerous on many levels. Germany had no guarantee that Mexico would comply. The nation itself was grappling with internal turmoil following the Mexican Revolution, and a war with the United States would stretch its limited resources. Yet Zimmermann calculated that the threat of Mexico opening a new front in North America could preoccupy the United States and prevent it from intervening in Europe immediately. The telegram, drafted in January 1917, was carefully encoded. Germany had long been developing complex cipher systems to protect sensitive communications. The message was to be sent across the Atlantic via diplomatic channels, in the hope that it would reach Mexico safely without interception. Every word, every symbol, every line carried immense weight. One misstep could expose the plan and turn it into a diplomatic disaster. But success could alter the trajectory of the war. From the perspective of Germany's leadership, the strategy made sense. The war in Europe had become a grinding stalemate, with millions dead and morale declining. Britain's control of the seas and the blockade threatened to strangle the Central Powers economically. The Zimmermann telegram represented a potential solution, a way to divert American attention and resources, buying Germany valuable time to consolidate its position on the European front. However, history has shown that no plan, no matter how carefully conceived, is immune to chance. Unknown to Zimmermann, the path that the telegram would travel was anything but secure. British intelligence, operating under the codename Room 40, had been monitoring German communications with increasing scrutiny. Britain's cryptographers had already cracked several German codes and were exceptionally vigilant. Every message, every transmission was a potential treasure trove of strategic information. As the German ciphered telegram embarked on its journey across the Atlantic, the stage was unknowingly set for one of the most consequential interceptions in history. The Hidden Plan of Germany, Part 2. The creation of the Zimmermann telegram was not a casual affair. It was the product of meticulous planning and high-level deliberation. Zimmermann, understanding the stakes, chose each word with care, knowing that the slightest misstep could unravel the entire scheme. He convened meetings with top advisors, weighing the potential reactions from Mexico, the United States, and even Britain. The plan was audacious, almost reckless, but it carried the potential to redirect the course of the entire war. The telegram itself was concise but laden with meaning. It read, in essence, that Germany would ally with Mexico if the United States entered the war, and in return, Mexico would be compensated with the territories of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. This offer, on paper, was designed to exploit Mexican nationalism and historical grievances. Yet even Zimmermann could not be certain of Mexico's willingness or capability to act upon such an instruction. Once drafted, the telegram had to be encoded. Germany had developed sophisticated cipher systems, and this message would employ one of the more complex versions. Each letter, each number, each symbol was selected not just to convey information, but to obscure it from unintended eyes. It was a test of intellect, patience, and secrecy. The journey of the telegram was as critical as its content. It would be transmitted across the Atlantic through Germany's diplomatic network, passing through telegraph lines, cables, and relay stations. At this stage, Zimmermann's team operated under the assumption that the message was secure, that the channels they were using were impervious to interception. But unbeknownst to them, British intelligence had long been monitoring German communications, and their cryptographic capabilities were formidable. Room 40, the British Naval Intelligence Unit, had a record of success that was both impressive and unnerving. They had already intercepted and decrypted numerous German communications, gaining valuable insight into Germany's military and diplomatic strategies. The unit operated in secrecy, staffed by brilliant codebreakers who worked tirelessly to decrypt messages that would otherwise remain hidden. To them, the Zimmermann telegram was a prize, a potential key to unlocking the next phase of the war. As the encoded message traveled across the Atlantic, the cryptographers at Room 40 meticulously pieced together fragments of intercepted transmissions. Each intercepted cable was analyzed with painstaking attention to detail. The work was slow, arduous, and required both patience and genius. They reconstructed the telegram, deciphering its meaning while maintaining the utmost secrecy. Meanwhile, Zimmermann remained unaware of the looming danger. In Germany, the plan was proceeding according to design. Preparations were made to ensure Mexico could be reached and that the message would be delivered securely. The Germans believed that once the United States declared war, an outcome they anticipated with concern, Mexico would act in accordance with the instructions. The assumption was that the threat of a northern front in North America would occupy U.S. attention and resources, buying Germany time in Europe. Yet history has a way of defying even the most careful calculations. The British, holding the decrypted telegram in secret, now faced a strategic dilemma of their own. Revealing the contents of the message to the United States could provoke American entry into the war, exactly what Germany had hoped to avoid. At the same time, the information contained in the telegram was too critical to ignore. It represented not just intelligence, but an opportunity to manipulate international events in favor of the Allies. To solve this dilemma, Britain devised a clever ruse. They would present the telegram to the Americans as if it had been obtained through neutral channels, thereby masking the fact that their codebreakers had intercepted and decrypted it. This maneuver required delicate handling and careful orchestration, as the success of the plan depended on convincing the Americans of the telegram's authenticity without exposing Britain's intelligence methods. The tension in Europe and America was building. In Germany, the Central Powers were still confident that their plan would achieve the desired outcome. In Britain, Room 40's cryptographers continued to refine their interpretation of the telegram, preparing for the moment it would be delivered to the United States. Across the Atlantic, in the Americas, life went on, mostly unaware of the clandestine forces at play. The telegram itself had become more than just a message. It was now a symbol of potential upheaval. It carried within it the power to alter the trajectory of nations, to force the United States into a conflict that many Americans had hoped to avoid. The Zimmermann telegram, carefully encoded and sent via diplomatic channels, was intended to reach Mexico securely. Germany had placed its trust in the message's secrecy, confident that it would reach Ambassador Heinrich von Eckart without interference. In theory, the telegram would deliver instructions to Mexico to prepare for a potential conflict with the United States, contingent upon American entry into the war. The Germans assumed Mexico, frustrated by territorial losses decades earlier, might seize the opportunity. Yet the Atlantic, in 1917, was not a controlled environment. The telegram passed through multiple relays, some of which were vulnerable to interception. British intelligence, through Room 40, had been monitoring German communications extensively. Their cryptographers, skilled in deciphering complex codes, had reconstructed the message and understood its full implications. For the British, the stakes were clear. This message had the potential to manipulate America's role in the war, either to delay its entry or provoke it. Once decrypted, the British faced a delicate dilemma. Revealing the telegram to the United States risked immediate American involvement in the war, a consequence Germany would have wanted to avoid. Yet keeping the intelligence secret also meant failing to warn an allied nation of a looming threat. The solution was cunning. Britain would present the telegram to the Americans as if it had been obtained from neutral sources, obscuring the fact that Room 40 had intercepted and deciphered it. In February 1917, British diplomats delivered the telegram to President Woodrow Wilson. The Oval Office, a place of solemn decisions, became the stage for a revelation that would alter global history. Wilson read the encoded message with his advisors, and the initial reaction was one of cautious disbelief. Could Germany really be plotting to incite Mexico against the United States? The content seemed almost too audacious to be true. At first, there was skepticism within the U.S. government. Officials debated the authenticity of the telegram. Was it propaganda? Could Germany really believe Mexico would risk war with a far stronger neighbor? These questions dominated the halls of Congress and the rooms of presidential advisors. For days, America's leadership deliberated, weighing the credibility of the British-provided intelligence against the strategic risk posed by Germany. Meanwhile, newspapers across the United States began to report rumors of Germany's intentions. Journalists, sensing a story with explosive potential, scrutinized every detail. Headlines hinted at betrayal and intrigue, drawing the attention of an anxious public. On February 24, 1917, the full content of the telegram was published in several newspapers, igniting outrage among American citizens. Headlines screamed, "Germany urges Mexico to attack U.S. Secret telegram threatens American territories." Public opinion shifted almost overnight. Citizens who had previously supported neutrality now questioned the wisdom of staying out of the conflict. The telegram, once a coded set of instructions intended for a distant government, had become a symbol of German audacity and potential threat. Political leaders felt the pressure, Congress debated the implications, and state governors voiced concerns about national security. Letters poured into newspapers, expressing fear, anger, and the demand for decisive action. Across the country, ordinary citizens discussed the telegram in homes, cafes, and town halls. The American public, previously detached from the European war, now perceived it as an immediate and personal danger. Germany, unaware of the interception, continued with its expectation that the telegram would reach Mexico intact. In Berlin, officials believed their plan was proceeding according to strategy. Yet Mexico, dealing with its own political turmoil, was unlikely to act aggressively against the United States. The message had already been compromised. The Germans had miscalculated the vulnerabilities in their communication channels. By early March 1917, the American response became more pronounced. President Wilson, acknowledging the threat posed by Germany, began to prepare for potential military engagement. Advisors discussed troop mobilization, naval readiness, and the logistics of sending forces across the Atlantic. The nation was transitioning from a stance of cautious neutrality to one of proactive defense. The Zimmermann telegram had done more than merely expose Germany's intentions. It had shifted the entire perception of the war within the United States. The idea that America could remain neutral while Germany schemed on its doorstep became untenable. Wilson realized that inaction could no longer safeguard American interests. The telegram had served its purpose. It had forced the U.S. government to confront the real possibility of conflict with Germany. The revelation of the Zimmermann telegram sent shockwaves across the United States. By March 1917, it had become clear that Germany's intentions were not abstract threats, but a direct challenge to American sovereignty. Citizens who had once advocated for neutrality now demanded action. Across towns and cities, people debated the telegram in cafes, schools, and workplaces, while newspapers fanned the flames of outrage with sensational headlines. President Woodrow Wilson faced an unprecedented dilemma. For years, he had adhered to a policy of neutrality, hoping to shield the United States from European entanglements. Yet the evidence now before him painted a starkly different picture. Germany had not only been waging unrestricted submarine warfare, endangering American lives and trade, but it had also attempted to incite Mexico to attack American territory. The twin threats, the U-boat attacks, and the Zimmermann telegram combined to create a crisis of national security that could no longer be ignored. Wilson convened meetings with his cabinet and military advisors, meticulously weighing the consequences of action versus inaction. He understood that entering the war would be costly in terms of lives, resources, and domestic political capital, yet remaining passive risked emboldening Germany and compromising American interests. The telegram had forced the issue. Neutrality was no longer sustainable. Congress was equally engaged in intense debates. Lawmakers scrutinized the telegram, considered intelligence reports, and deliberated on the implications of war. Questions were raised. Could Mexico actually launch an effective attack? Would entering the European conflict place the United States in unnecessary danger? Despite these uncertainties, the consensus grew that decisive action was necessary. The telegram had shifted the balance of opinion, creating political momentum toward intervention. The American public, meanwhile, responded with a mixture of fear, anger, and determination. Letters poured into newspapers and government offices urging swift action. Citizens felt personally threatened by Germany's audacity. The notion that a foreign power could encourage attacks on American soil provoked a visceral response. Patriotic sentiment surged, strengthening the case for military preparedness. In the weeks following the telegram's exposure, the United States began a massive mobilization. Shipyards increased production to support naval operations. Military training camps expanded to prepare troops for deployment. Recruitment campaigns encouraged young men to enlist, and industrial production pivoted to supply the military with weapons, ammunition, and essential materials. America was transforming from a neutral observer into a formidable force capable of projecting power abroad. The Zimmermann telegram, initially intended as a strategic ploy by Germany, had paradoxically strengthened the Allied cause. By exposing Germany's audacity and vulnerabilities, it unified American public opinion and facilitated a rapid transition to military engagement. The U.S. Navy intensified patrols along the Atlantic coast, while diplomats communicated with Allied leaders to coordinate strategies for eventual deployment of American forces. As April 1917 approached, the final pieces fell into place. President Wilson addressed Congress on April 2nd, delivering a speech that outlined the threats posed by Germany and the necessity of entering the war. He emphasized the principles at stake: the defense of neutral rights, the protection of American citizens, and the maintenance of global order. Wilson's eloquence and the evidence presented, including the Zimmermann telegram, persuaded Congress to act. On April 6, 1917, the United States formally declared war on Germany. The entry of America into World War I marked a turning point. Fresh troops, abundant resources, and industrial capacity provided the Allies with a renewed advantage. Battles that had previously reached stalemates began to shift in favor of the Allied powers. While the direct military engagement of U.S. forces would unfold over the subsequent year, the political and psychological impact was immediate. Germany, confronted with the prospect of American intervention, had lost a critical element of strategic leverage. From a historical perspective, the Zimmermann telegram illustrates the profound influence of intelligence and communication on global events. A single intercepted message, created with the intention of manipulating a neutral power, became a catalyst for decisive action. It demonstrates how human decision-making, chance, and foresight converge to shape the course of history. As Chapter 1 concludes, the stage is set for the next phase of the story. Germany's audacious gamble had failed, Britain's strategic acumen had successfully navigated the intelligence dilemma, and America had emerged as a decisive actor on the world stage. A distant message promised lost lands, but Mexico faced a dilemma that could change its future forever. While the Zimmermann telegram had been intercepted by Britain and would later be revealed to the United States, Germany at the time remained confident that their plan could work. The next crucial step was Mexico. Ambassador Heinrich von Eckart received the coded instructions from Berlin, detailing Germany's expectations and the promise of reclaimed territories. Yet, unlike the Germans imagined, the Mexican government faced a profound dilemma. Mexico, in 1917, was still recovering from the upheavals of the Mexican Revolution. Political instability, regional power struggles, and limited military resources made the prospect of confronting the United States a dangerous proposition. The government, led by President Venustiano Carranza, had to weigh the potential gains promised by Germany against the near certainty of defeat in a war with one of the most powerful nations on the continent. The telegram presented a tantalizing vision. Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona could be restored to Mexican sovereignty. Yet the reality was stark. Mexico's army lacked the resources, modern equipment, and infrastructure necessary to launch a sustained campaign against the United States. Additionally, internal divisions among military leaders and regional governors meant that any coordinated action would be difficult to achieve. Ambassador von Eckart reported back to Berlin, detailing Mexico's skepticism. He highlighted the logistical challenges, the fragmented political landscape, and the general reluctance to engage in a conflict that would almost certainly bring devastation. Germany, however, was insistent. The message urged decisive action, warning that if the United States entered the war against the Central Powers, Mexico must act to tie down American forces. Despite Germany's insistence, Mexico's leaders remained cautious. Advisors debated the feasibility of the plan in secret councils, considering factors such as troop readiness, potential alliances, and public support. Some argued that rejecting Germany's offer would maintain peace and allow Mexico to continue stabilizing after years of revolution. Others feared that refusal could jeopardize diplomatic relations with Germany and harm Mexico's international standing. While Germany pressed for commitment, Mexico explored potential diplomatic alternatives. Officials reached out to neutral nations and analyzed the likelihood of support from Germany. They understood that, without significant external assistance, launching a war against the United States was almost impossible. At the same time, the allure of regaining lost territories created internal tension, fueling debates among political and military leaders. The situation highlighted a critical disconnect. Germany viewed Mexico as a potential pawn in a larger strategic game, while Mexico considered the pragmatic realities of geography, military strength, and domestic stability. This gap between expectation and reality would ultimately prevent Germany's plan from materializing. Beyond political debate, Mexico also faced the challenge of public perception. Citizens were wary of a war with the United States, aware that it could devastate the economy and cause widespread suffering. Newspapers and political commentators questioned the feasibility of Germany's promise, urging caution and advising leaders to prioritize national stability over distant ambitions. Germany, frustrated by Mexico's hesitation, attempted to provide reassurances. Communications emphasized the urgency of the situation, outlining how a delayed response could compromise strategic opportunities in Europe. Berlin's diplomats sought to instill confidence in Mexican leaders, highlighting that America's entry into the war was a growing possibility and that timely action was necessary to capitalize on Germany's offer. Despite these efforts, the Mexican leadership ultimately chose pragmatism over risk. They rejected the proposal to engage militarily with the United States. Mexico understood that any conflict with America, even with German support, would likely result in severe consequences, including territorial loss, internal instability, and economic collapse. By prioritizing national security and domestic recovery, Mexico avoided the fate Germany had envisioned. While Mexico declined, Germany continued to pursue alternative strategies to influence the war. Diplomats and military advisors explored other options, such as propaganda campaigns and limited coordination with sympathetic groups in Latin America. These efforts, however, could not replicate the ambitious vision of the Zimmermann telegram. The episode revealed critical lessons about the limits of power and influence. Germany's attempt to manipulate a distant nation highlighted the risks inherent in overestimating allies' willingness or capacity to act. Britain and U.S. reaction, 1,500 words. The world was watching as governments maneuvered behind closed doors, unaware that history was being reshaped. While Germany was pushing Mexico to act, and Britain had successfully intercepted the Zimmermann telegram, the Allied leadership had to decide how to use this intelligence effectively. Room 40, Britain's elite code-breaking unit, had decrypted the telegram weeks before it became public knowledge, giving the British a rare strategic advantage. The question now was not what the telegram said, but how to leverage it without compromising their intelligence methods. The British government convened urgent meetings involving top diplomats, intelligence officers, and military strategists. They debated the potential consequences of revealing the telegram to the United States. One faction argued that doing so could force America into the war prematurely, potentially increasing Allied losses in the short term. Another argued that withholding the information risked Germany's plan succeeding, which could result in the U.S. facing a conflict on its own soil and weakening the broader Allied position. Meanwhile, British officials coordinated a careful diplomatic approach. They prepared documentation and narratives that would make the telegram appear authentic if presented to the Americans, ensuring that the true source, the cryptographers of Room 40, remained secret. This required meticulous planning. Any misstep could alert Germany to the interception, potentially compromising Britain's entire intelligence operation. Across the Atlantic, American officials were already monitoring global developments. Wilson's administration was increasingly aware of Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare, which threatened American trade and shipping. Intelligence reports hinted at possible German diplomatic maneuvers, though details remained sparse. The arrival of the Zimmermann telegram, carefully delivered through diplomatic channels, provided clarity. President Wilson and his advisors convened in multiple meetings to discuss the implications. Legal, military, and diplomatic experts analyzed the risks, considering every possible scenario. Could Mexico realistically attack the United States? What would be the economic and political consequences? Could this be a bluff? These discussions, conducted behind closed doors, reflected the gravity of the situation. Unlike public narratives, these internal deliberations were tense, detailed, and grounded in a cold assessment of reality, rather than speculation. Beyond the White House, the intelligence also had to reach key congressional leaders to prepare the political groundwork for action. Select members of Congress were briefed, allowing them to begin discrete discussions about potential military readiness, funding, and legislative support. These early briefings were crucial in shaping the legislative response that would come later, ensuring that when the time for public disclosure arrived, the government was prepared to act decisively. Britain's handling of the telegram exemplified strategic diplomacy. By controlling the flow of information, they maximized the impact of the intelligence while minimizing operational risk. Internal memos outlined how to present the telegram as credible and actionable, emphasizing the urgency of German intentions without revealing Britain's methods. These memoranda would later form the backbone of the coordinated diplomatic effort that ultimately swayed American opinion. The media landscape in the United States also played a role, though indirectly at this stage. Rumors and speculation about German intentions filtered through newspapers, influencing public sentiment without explicit confirmation. Editors, sensing an impending revelation, began to prepare coverage that would frame the story as a credible threat once official disclosure occurred. Journalists were unaware of the British intelligence maneuver, yet their reporting helped shape the environment into which the telegram would eventually be released. Strategically, the telegram's exposure to American officials had cascading effects. Military planners began considering troop mobilization, naval patrol expansions, and contingency operations in case of an eventual declaration of war. Economic advisors examined trade routes, potential disruptions, and financing for wartime expenditure. The document, though ostensibly a diplomatic note, had become a catalyst for multi-level national preparation. Political dynamics were equally affected. Wilson's advisors were aware that public opinion could be volatile once the telegram became known. They prepared messaging strategies to ensure that the American public understood the gravity